Here now with reaction, ranking member of the House Intel Committee, Devin Nunes, author of the new book, the sequel, out in just a couple of weeks, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. There are important issues here, though, as we begin tonight in these developments. First, I watched Jim Jordan and Nadler battle it out over whether or not they even want to have the Inspector General after the FISA abuse report. Congressman, that's a problem for me.
Well, don't be surprised, Sean. The Democrats control the House. This is what they want to do. They've been in cover-up mode this entire time. They were in on the hoax. Don't forget, the dossier in 2016 was given by John Brennan to Harry Reid. So we don't know how many of the Democrats knew about this hoax. And I'm glad you're talking about the media continually, because we as Republicans, we need to stop talking to these media people, because most of the media that's out there, they are just assets of the Democratic Party. And I think Republicans need to just, if there's fair reporters out there, fine. But the New York Times and the others that continue to spread these fallacies, just like the other, bombshell the other day, talking about these sources that were supposedly blown, which, is also fake news. This needs to stop, and Republicans need to stop giving quotes to these mainstream media outlets.
All right. I agree with all of that, Greg Jarrett, with all of this developing news. What did you think, first of all, of Catherine's report? What did you think, secondly, of Tom Fitton and this huge development? Looks like they were coming up with a story. And the story was, we'll just act like we were kidding. We won't mean it's real. Right. It's sort of like, well, Trump has killed millions more than Mao, Hitler, and Stalin. But I couldn't hear. My IFB wasn't in my ear.
Well, the Judicial Watch documents demonstrate the extent to which Rod Rosenstein lied and covered up his scheme to secretly record the president and depose him from office under the 25th Amendment, recruiting cabinet members. At first, he tries to shut down all comment. Then he carefully crafts a non-denial denial that's nothing more than a deflection. Then he has friends leak to the media, oh, it was just sarcasm. And then, as I recount in Chapter 4 of my new book, he goes on board Air Force One and he lies to the President of the United States. I interviewed the President about that, and he reveals Rosenstein's lie. As for Catherine Herridge's report, I mean, this is more evidence that James Comey and Andrew McCabe knew and were warned that Bruce Orr and especially Christopher Steele had been peddling a phony dossier. They should have run immediately to the FISA court and notified them that's the law. They didn't do it. They broke the law. They need to be held accountable.
I agreed. And what was your reaction, Devin Nunes? And what do you see coming next? Because you know this as well as, if not better than everybody else in the country.
Well, I want to go back to Catherine Herridge's report. So what General Flynn's lawyers are saying, I want to let the American people know, and your audience, we've been looking for that same document. We know that document exists, this document that came from the British government, but yet nobody can seem to find it. So, I know there are witnesses out there that know this, and I hope that the judge in this case will actually get those witnesses that know this document exists and let them come in and talk to the court, or at least give an affidavit to the court.
Do you have any ambiguity on this simple, basic question? Because we expect any day, probably next week or no later than the week after. So I'm told that the Inspector General report on FISA abuse will be out. Do you have any doubt that he will conclude, based on what we already know, they were warned ahead of time, premeditated, about the dirty dossier, that it was political, it was unverified, and Christopher Steele has an agenda? They were warned multiple times, but they still used it as the bulk of information for the FISA applications, which, of course, we know were granted. And as McCabe said, no dossier, no FISA warrant. Do you think that those 4 FISA applications were obtained illegally, and the IG will agree with you, me, and Greg?
So just to remember, we were the ones that came out and exposed all this to the American people first, knowing that these were all a fraud because we knew that the dossier had been used. And I just ask people always just to take a step back and add a little bit of, just take a little bit of common sense approach to this. The dossier was so ridiculous that, any small police department or a small county sheriff would be able to figure out that 90% of that dossier was fake within a matter of just a few days. So, you know, at the time that Brennan is peddling it, the time that others are peddling it, they know it's fake.
Okay, the question is, were they obtained illegally, and will the IG see the truth in that, and we'll have equal justice in this country?
So yes, of course they were obtained illegally, and they defrauded the U.S. Greg Jarrett's talked a lot about it. But just to remember, the IG has a limited scope. What this is really about are building blocks. The Comey report, the IG report on the FISA abuse. This goes to Lindsey Graham and his committee, and ultimately goes to Durham and the U.S. Attorney.
Well, that's a great tease for our next segment, because Lindsey Graham's next. Will they find all 4 warrants obtained illegally? You only have 10 seconds, Greg.
Absolutely, and they were warned not once but 4 times that it was based on phony evidence, and they lied to the court. That's perjury, and it's also a fraud.
Thank you. All right, thank you both.